if Jalen Hurts isn't, very mobile, that certainly raises questions about how effective the passing game can be. But if we're looking at this Eagles offense, we're starting and almost ending with Saquon Barkley and just how effective he's been, continues to just break off these long runs, these long touchdowns. You look at what he did against the Commanders this year, 198 yards from scrimmage and 2 touchdowns in the first game, 150 yards from scrimmage and 2 touchdowns in the second game. He's averaged 6.0 yards per touch and 5.8 yards per carry against the Commanders this year. And that was with in that second game with Hurts kind of missing the second half, we saw them really struggle to move the ball in that second half with Kenny Pickett at quarterback. And so if you take those out and it's just Jalen Hurts on the field, he averaged 7.3 yards per touch and 6.1 yards per carry against the Commanders this year. Like everything about this screams that this is a mismatch and that Saquon Barkley is just going to have a good game again. I mean, obviously there's a chance it just doesn't happen, right? But like everything about this screams this is a massive mismatch, this Eagles running game with Saquon Barkley against the Commanders run defense that they're just going to have to take advantage of in much better than the Lions took advantage of it last week, because the Lions had a ton of success. I mean, Gibbs averaged like 10 yards a touch or something wild like that. They just didn't take enough advantage of it. And I think the Eagles probably are going to game plan around Saquon this week.
Oh, you know what you're gonna get, and the Washington defense still has been so bad against running back runs. It's not even, you remove the Jameson Williams run. So though Saquon Barkley averages the most yards before contact per rush in the NFL, Washington allows the most yards before contact per rush. Their playoff stats are actually worse than their regular season stats through 2 games too. They during over the course of the season, they have a 58% success rate against running back runs. It's 28th in the NFL. In these 2 playoff games, it goes down to 51% success rate against running back runs. They've allowed 5.4 yards per carry to running backs, 2.62 yards before contact to the Lions and Buccaneers backfields, and they're getting the best back in the NFL this season. So we're going to see a lot of Saquon in this game. I'm very curious about the Jalen Hurts side of it and the potential tempo, of this game too, which we didn't talk about with the Commanders, who run the most no huddle in the NFL. But Jalen Hurts with the knee injury, he hasn't been very good. Like to say that like politely, he hasn't been very good in these 2 playoff
Yeah.
games. He was absolutely horrendous last week against the Rams. He had the highest sack rate for a quarterback in any game this season in the NFL. Sacked on 26% of his dropbacks. He's been pressured at the highest rate in the NFL, and it's the pressures that are his that have become the issue. Pro Football Focus has him with just under 20% of the pressures that he takes are his own fault just from holding the ball. I mean, that safety he took last week was egregious. I mean,
I
he had
hoped you were
that.
going to mention the safety. The
Yeah.
safety is one of the worst plays. I that's such a confusing play for him to have taken, to just be standing there with open receivers. Like it wasn't like there was blanket coverage. It was just I it was very, very odd play, but it's kind of part and parcel to what we've seen from Hurts all year. This isn't like a new thing with Jalen Hurts. He is playing worse. Things have not been going as well, but like he's held the ball all season and not held the ball to throw it downfield, held the ball and still throwing it short and not, creating the big plays you might create off of holding the ball for longer while still taking all of those sacks. This isn't like a new problem. This is a thing that has existed all season. And so you have to question at this point whether it's going to fix itself. But again, they could be in the Super Bowl without it fixing itself. So like what are we going to do? But I do think you have to accept that this might just be a functional, fundamental, structural problem with this offense and with Hurts in particular.
They have a couple of ways to, but this matters though for this particular matchup because we talked about the Washington defense not really
Yeah.
particularly being good outside of turnovers they generated. But the pressure matters here. So no one's held the ball longer after the snap than Hurts this season. No quarterback. He averages over 3 seconds per time to throw from the snap, which is pretty rare. But pressure matters in this matchup because when Hurts has not been pressured this season, he actually leads the NFL in completion rate, and he's fourth in yards per pass attempt. When he gets rid of the football, everything's working. He's been the passing game's been good. We see because they had a ton of weapons, right? Like this can work. We've seen Hurts have efficiency and high upside passing too. This isn't like he's been like just a terrible quarterback. We've seen it. But when he has been pressured this season, he goes to 24th in completion rate, under 45%. He goes to 30th in yards per pass attempt when he's pressured. So that's massive here. And so Washington, when they pressured him on the small sample that he played because he left that second game early, he was only 2 of 8 for 3.4 yards per pass attempt against Washington. But when Washington failed to pressure Hurts, he was 17 of 24, 205 yards, 8.5 yards per pass attempt. And we've talked about Washington. They've been really bad in the quick game this season. On throws with 2.5 up to 2.5 seconds per snap, they are 25th in yards per pass attempt allowed, and they've allowed the highest touchdown rate in the league. On Saturday against Jared Goff on those throws was 17 of 22, 8.4 yards per pass attempt, 2 touchdowns, 0 of his turnovers when he was getting rid of the football. But when Washington has forced teams to hold the ball longer and Dan Quinn has played some coverage, they actually go to 9th in yards per pass attempt. They've allowed the lowest touchdown rate in the league. Jared Goff on those passes only completed 57%, 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions on those plays. So I mean, Dan Quinn, I believe, has to play more coverage in this game. The second time these teams played, I don't know if he played a lot more man coverage because Hurts exited the game, or that was going to be the plan because they had just acquired Marshawn Lattimore and they were going to play aggressively. But hopefully he does a lot what he did against Detroit, and he forces Hurts to try to hold the football, because when Hurts has held the football, he's invited more pressures, and Washington's been a better team when they force teams to kind of, hold the football and kind of not beat them up in the quick game. But the injury to Hurts could actually be a blessing in disguise for the Eagles, because what if it does force them to throw quicker, and have a quicker passing game, because it Hurts not relying on his mobility or bailout. So I'm very curious to see that angle of it too, if it actually ends up being kind of a little bit of a pro for the Eagles, to getting the ball out of Hurts' hands quicker. And I'm very curious to see too how it impacts the potential tempo of this game. With the number 1 and number 2 teams in rate of no-huddle plays, Washington's by far way ahead of number 2 team. But that number 2 team is the Eagles. And there was a lot of narrative that came around after last week's drive against Prevent of will the Commanders play a lot more no huddle, like the Rams had some success in that game, which was, I think, more driven by prevent defense, because like I said, no one ran more no huddle in the Commanders this season. They actually ran no huddle on 62% of their snaps in their 2 matchups against the Eagles, and there was no discernible advantage. They averaged 5 yards per play when they huddled, 5 yards per play, dead even without huddles in that game. Ironically enough too, the Eagles allowed more yards per play to the Rams when the Rams huddled last week versus no huddle situations. But the flip side of that is the Eagles have been one of the best no-huddle offenses in the NFL this season. When these teams played in the regular season, the Eagles averaged 8.2 yards per play when they didn't huddle versus 4.6 yards per play when they did huddle. And it was a large sample, just under 40 plays. And that's consistent throughout the course of these playoffs in the season. The Eagles are 21st in the NFL in yards per play when huddling, but they go to 3rd in the NFL in yards per play in no huddle situations. On Sunday against the Rams, they had 19 no huddle snaps for 9.3 yards per play. They huddled 42 snaps and had 4.1 yards per play, the fewest of any team on no huddle plays in the divisional round. There's some weather stuff that plays into that, but that's, like I said, consistent over the large sample of the season. So ironically, a lot of people are kind of calling for the Commanders to play more no huddle in this game, but it actually should be the Eagles. The Eagles have a larger advantage, objective advantage, on not just only their plays against the Commanders this season, but against everybody when they play no huddle.
I think that, there could be a couple things at play there. We complain about Jalen Hurts holding the ball, but we also complain about just the kind of, I guess, I don't know what the right word is, lackadaisical kind of feel of the offense, of getting up to the ball, of getting out into formation. I wonder if just getting into no huddle speeds everything up, and this offense is just better when everything's sped up. Are we speeding up Jalen Hurts? Is he getting rid of the ball faster? All of that, is interesting, and I would like to see more of that from them. But I mean, again, as I said, this has been a problem for a long time, and so expecting it to just change this week, I don't know. But it would behoove them to definitely take a look at it and to change. On the Eagles pass catchers, because we've just been talking about Hurts and kind of his success, I can't make any grand predictions about the Eagles pass catchers, because it's all dependent on volume and if they're going to be able to throw a lot. I kind of think they might be able to slow down the Washington offense and ride Saquon. And if that happens, I would lean towards another low volume game, regardless of how they, how they approach this passing attack. But I mean, you could see the opportunity of this game shooting out, and if that's the case, then maybe we get more targets for AJ Brown, maybe we get more targets for Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. But AJ Brown is really the guy because when they throw to him a lot, and if we do get a lot more volume, you would suspect that AJ Brown stands to benefit in a big way in this spot.
Well, we've been waiting. We've been chasing it all year, basically. That's what it feels like because you don't get these runouts for high target games with the Eagles. He has double digit targets in 2 games all season. It's just really hard to get volume for these pass catchers. I'm very curious for the Dan Quinn side of this though, because we have this 2-game sample since the Commanders acquired Marshawn Lattimore, where they said, you know what, we're going to come out and we're going to try to play big boy defense where our number one cornerback shuts down the opposing number one wide receiver. And they've gotten flooded in both of those matchups. The first one was the first time these teams played. They played a lot of man coverage against was led in the Kenny Pickett Eagles. But AJ Brown had a 60% target share in that second game. He absolutely killed them in that game. He drew 3 long pass interferences. Obviously, went over 100 yards. He had caught 5 passes on Marshawn Lattimore and a touchdown on him. We saw Lattimore get worked by Mike Evans when they tried to play a lot of man coverage against the Buccaneers. So how does Dan Quinn call this game? Is he going to try to drop back and play coverage, which I believe he should? He should be trying to make Hurts hold the football. Or does he get aggressive and say, maybe Hurts is injured, I'm not scared of Hurts as a passer, I'm going to play more coverage, play more man coverage in this game and go back to some of that tendency that they had to close the year, because that's going to play like right into the hands of AJ Brown. I mean, we've seen that not just from this year, the sample since he's joined the Eagles, this has been one of the best wide receivers against man coverage, in the NFL. He averages just under 4.5 yards per out run against man coverage this season. So, I would assume that someone has fed that information to Dan Quinn as well. So maybe they adjust too. We talked about Sean McDermott last week. We talked about all the stuff with the Ravens. And it's like, I assume that if I know this, that Sean McDermott knows this. So I assume that he also has this information. So what kind of coverage do they play? Do they play a lot more zone? Does that push stuff to Goddard? And does that push stuff to Devontae Smith? Or do they just willing to die on the AJ Brown hill?